So here it is with no EQ, and then I'll turn the EQ on.
What gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give.
Hey everyone, my name is Chris Green. I hope you're doing well. Today's video is going to be quite the deep dive as I break down the entire production, mixing all my plugin settings for the song that we recently just released called Yet Not I, But Through Christ in Me. This is a cover song, and halfway what we're doing is we enjoy recording music here at home. So if you're interested in the music production side of things, of how to get up and recording with PreSonus Studio One, there are literally hundreds of videos here on my channel you can check out with tutorials and tips. But what we like to do is we like to record music. So every audio file of this song you can download for free. So in the description of this video, there's gonna be a link to a PayHip website. Now, I do this and I make it free because I don't want you all to be nervous about the process of using another website. I know sometimes you see a link off to other websites and it looks really sketchy, but I've been really pleased with the results I get with PayHip, where they allow me to release digital products. So this one is completely free. Look for the one that's Yet Not I. It is called Mix Rep. So you get your mix reps in by practicing mixing. You can download the raw audio tracks and mix this song entirely yourself. I'm gonna be using a lot of UAD and third-party plugins on this mix, but you can feel free to download the audio tracks and try to recreate it with the Studio One stock plugins. We'll get to that stuff in just a minute. Of course, if you enjoy the content, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. Most likely this video is gonna get a copyright because this song was originally done by City Alight. We've recorded everything fresh here in the room. So before we get started in the production breakdown, let me just play a short snippet from the video that we released just yesterday. We'll play about 30 seconds or so. Feel free to skip over if you just wanna get to the plugins, okay? So here is the song, and then I'll break down the mix.
What gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, for my life is wholly bound to His. Oh, how strange and divine, I can sing, all is mine, yet not I, but through Christ in me.
All right, if you don't already have a pair of headphones, make sure you get a pair of headphones on. You're really gonna be able to hear the nuances, especially when we get into the reverb settings and turning off and on plugins. Make sure you got a good pair of headphones on. Now, like I said before, all of these audio tracks you can download for free in the description of this video, but let me just walk through kind of our recording setup. So everything, as you could tell in the video, that was actually the takes that were being recorded at the time. I'm using this desktop boom arm, and instead of using the SM7, as is normally the case, I've got my Neumann TLM 103. This is a large diaphragm condenser mic. And every acoustic source, I used this microphone. So you can see Lana was singing into it without a pop filter. She's pretty good distance away, at least a foot or two. And that stuff is running into my UAD Apollo interface. So the Apollo interface has the ability to run what's called unison preamp technology, okay? So here on channel 1, as you can see, there's kind of grayed out this Neve 1084. So this is an emulation of a Neve preamp. The vocals, acoustic guitars, and mandolin were all recorded using this Neve 1084. If you don't have the 1084, I've heard it said, at least in comments and forums, that the 1084 is basically the same as a Neve 1073 preamp. It just has different EQ spots that you can use. So in this example, it looks like I'm boosting a little bit of what they have labeled as 16K. Gosh, I believe that's 16K, it could be 18, okay? But we're boosting a little bit of top end with the Neve preamp. I'm not doing any changes to the low end, and then the gain will change depending on the instrument, whether that's vocals or acoustic guitar. Okay, but essentially we're recording everything with this TLM 103. Lana sang a lead vocal and then also a harmony, same exact setup. Now, as far as instruments, first I'll talk about, this is actually what's labeled Acoustic 2. This is my Taylor GS Mini. I got this for Lana because it's a very lightweight and small acoustic. Interesting note, it does have a large sound hole. It seems like this sound hole is a lot larger than my Martin. And what I really like about this Taylor guitar, it could come down to the wood that it's made out of, but it has a bright sound to it. It doesn't have a lot of mid-range. So that makes it great for doing those cowboy chords, as you'll hear as I'm playing through the song. Mainly this guitar is just hanging out in root position, and I'm doing some strumming every now and then. The other guitar is a normal on this channel. This is my Martin OM21. This is also a smaller size than a standard acoustic guitar, but as you can tell, the sound hole is a little bit smaller. This guitar is capoed up on the 5th fret. I'm playing G shapes, and I'm doing some finger picking throughout the entire song, okay? I'm not the type, or I'm trying to get away from double tracking my guitars. So if you only have one acoustic guitar, you may be tempted to record that guitar playing chords down here, and then create a new track and play the same thing over and over again. I would encourage you to experiment with doing something very different when you double track your guitars. So the first track could have some strumming on it. Then you need to get yourself a capo, and what the capo allows you to do is essentially transpose your chord shapes so that you can get some interesting sounds to them. So I made the decision to capo up on the 5th fret, use G shapes, and this acoustic guitar is mainly picking. With both guitars, I'm trying to get the large diaphragm condenser pointed as much as possible right here on this wood. I don't want the microphone to be miking the sound hole. That would be too much low end, and I don't want to be miking the strings. That would be too brittle sounding, I feel like. And this is usually the spot I'm aiming for. So right below the neck, right where you've got this wood here, you do some tapping, okay? This is a new addition. A few weeks ago, I got this mandolin, and this is nothing special. I can't remember the exact model type, but this is made in Korea. It is a Fender mandolin, and honestly, the reason I got it is, one, it was used and affordable. It has a pickup. This pickup is very noisy, so I do not use this unless we're in like some sort of live situation. It's nice to have, but of course, if you're getting something that is this affordable or this cheap, I highly recommend that you change the strings. As soon as I changed the strings on this mandolin, it sounded like a completely different instrument. Now, there's some intonation issues. I do need to learn how to do a proper setup on this, but with new strings, I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to mic up this lower part of the mandolin, not up here. I'm trying to get the microphone as much as possible to the body of the mandolin, because even though the mandolin has a very bright and high-pitched sound to it, I want to try to get so much of the body of this so that it doesn't just sound like a MIDI instrument, okay? But that's the mandolin. All right, so aside from the acoustic guitars, the mandolin, and the vocal, I've got what's called a multi-instrument in PreSonus Studio One. So this is a virtual instrument where basically you can layer your virtual instruments together. So as I'm playing this keyboard, every time I hit a note, there's actually multiple virtual instruments being triggered at the same time. I'm gonna show you how that works. So here is my virtual instrument channel. Typically, when you open up the instruments tab on the side, you would drag and drop an instance of Presence or whatever your virtual instrument is. Could be Easy Drummer. You drag and drop it onto a new track, it creates that instrument. If you drag and drop a second instrument, it will be a pop-up and it will ask you, do you want to add this to your existing instrument? Do you want to combine it, or do you want to replace it? I, of course, chose to combine. So I've got two virtual instruments being cued from this Casio Privia. The Casio Privia's got some sort of M-Audio MIDI to USB dongle going into my MacBook so that as I hit these notes, it is triggering this on the screen. So as you can see, the multi-instrument at the bottom, there's a pink tab and there is a purple tab. The purple represents the pad sound, the synth pad. The pink sound represents my piano VST. So let's start with just the piano. This is from East West. East West has got this Steinway D emulation. I'll play a little bit here. So. That one's pretty fun. The only thing I've done from the default setting is I closed the lid a little bit to make it a little duller. I'm using the close mic positions. And when you go into the mix tab, there is some compression. This stuff is emulating basically an SSL console. Not much to speak of as far as the EQ goes. I didn't make any major moves there, but you can see the stereo bus compressor is doing a lot of lifting for me. Okay. That is my piano VST, and like I said, this is a multi-instrument. The second instrument that's being layered with it is from Presence, and I'm using a preset called Big Pad. You can see my settings here on the screen. I did do a little bit of manipulating with the filter. Here's what the pad sounds like. Nice little pad there. And of course, because it's a multi-instrument, I have both of these layered together. So when I hit a G chord, there's really a ton of things you can do when it comes to multi-instruments in PreSonus Studio One. The main thing I want to call your attention to is that when you select your instruments, so we have play, which is the piano sound right here, you're given a little bit of a fader, and then on Presence, you can also use the fader as well to balance the two out. If you're using something like a bass or pad like I've got here, and you want it to be dramatically lower in volume, you can just simply turn down the fader for that particular instrument. My choice was just to go into the instrument VST itself and turn down the volume by 6 decibels. That's usually a good ratio. So whatever my main VST is, I've got that right at 0. And then whatever I'm layering with it, I'll drop it down to about -6. So that is the virtual instrument. I'll go ahead and disable that. You can see the MIDI notes that were recorded as well. But what I did is I bounced the track out, so it's just in audio form. So if you're downloading the files in the description of this video, you're gonna get an audio form which has the performance already embedded with the 2 sounds. Here's what that sounds like. So now let's break down this production. So I've got the arrangement tab here at the top. This song is very hymn-like. It's very similar to In Christ Alone, if you're familiar with that. I highly encourage you to use the arranger track. So the arranger track is available at the top left. You can click this little burger stack, open up the arranger, and make sure you've got all your stuff labeled out. So I've got intro, verse, turnaround, verse 3, turnaround, verse 4, tag, 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 a bunch of tags in this song. It's very standard to what City of Light did on their first production of this song. On those turnarounds, these are moments when I wanted the mandolin. The mandolin is effectively my lead instrument. You're gonna hear it playing a very familiar melody all throughout this song. So let me solo that. So that is my melody, or that's my riff that I'm gonna come back to over and over and over again. As we look at the plugins, you can see from channel to channel, this is a very minimal mix. There's not a lot going on, but everything's very intentional, okay? In a lot of ways, if I had a song with drums and bass, there are both positives and negatives of having more tracks in your session. I like the challenge of having the minimal setup. Of course, we could record drums, and we have recorded drums here in this room. But if you can get really good at, my goal is to get really good at these acoustic minimal sessions, then when I add drums and things in the future, it'll just get better and better. All right, one of the main things you're gonna notice is I have an effects setup called Chamber. So all of my tracks have some sort of level of UAD Capital Chambers, okay? This is one of my favorite reverb plugins. This is from UAD, so of course you're gonna have to spend money on it to get it. If you're using PreSonus Studio One, you load up the Room Reverb plugin. you should be able to get some similar results. But all of my tracks are being sent to this one reverb. This is part of me kind of getting into like the whole purist mindset, but I like the idea of just having like one reverb space. This would be very similar to how they would record back in the day. They would have a few chambers to choose from, real spaces or a plate reverb, and that would be it. There wasn't a whole lot of manipulating going on. I did load a preset. This is the Al Schmidt The One preset, and I've got the mix knob all the way up at 100%. So let me solo this reverb so you can hear what it sounds like. So everything's being sent to this. All right, and if I turned off the reverb and we listen to that same passage, here's what the song sounds like with absolutely no reverb. I'll have it off and then I will turn it on, okay? So this is with it bypassed.
What gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, for my life is wholly bound to His.
It's very subtle. I've got this reverb set to -6, -8. My eyes are terrible. I've got it set to -8, which is a good range. You could probably bring it up to -6 if you want. What I'm hearing is as soon as I unbypass this reverb, you introduce reverb, everything's kind of getting this blanket wrapped around it. It feels very comfortable. If things are recorded too direct, where you don't have any ambience whatsoever, especially when you're recording in a small bedroom like this, adding just a little bit of ambience, even if it's just like a 1.2 second reverb tail, is gonna make it sound like you actually recorded in a nice little space, okay? So reverb, our human ears are very accustomed to hearing things in a defined space. It would be totally fine if I didn't have any of this reverb. When you heard the reverb bypass, it sounded totally fine. It's just as soon as the reverb's on, I get this feeling of, everything's kind of blending together a little bit more naturally sounding, okay? So that is my chamber reverb. The things that I want further back in the mix, I'm sending them more to the reverb than things that are close in front. So the lead vocal has a send level of -10. The harmony vocal has a send level of -5. The acoustic guitar -6, pretty much across. And then the mandolin -2. So mandolin's getting a lot of reverb. To set that up, you simply go to your sends section, hit the plus button, add effects channel, and then when you're on your effects channel, add your plugins such as PreSonus. You can open up Room Reverb and load up a cold chamber. I think they call it cold cellar. Should get pretty similar results there. And of course, that's going to my main bus. All right, so now let's break down track by track. Here's my lead vocal with absolutely no plugin processing, no reverb whatsoever. We'll solo it up.
What gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give.
All right, and of course we're gonna break this down. This is, let me get off the advanced view here, but this is UAD Auto-Tune, okay? If you're doing modern mixing, and believe it or not, I would say the majority of the tracks that you're listening to on the internet have all got auto-tune of some sort, okay? If they're not using auto-tune, they're probably letting you know right from the get-go, okay? But this auto-tune is set to alto tenor, which is my wife's range here. We're in the key of C. I've put it on C major. This is the main setting here, the retune speed. I've got it set to 29. Anything in the 20s or 10s is gonna be very robotic sounding. You'll be able to hear that in just a second. So if I turn on this auto tune, let's listen to it being tuned.
Gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer. There is no more for heaven now to give.
If I take that retune speed and I crank it up to 10, it should sound a lot more like T-Pain. It's a little bit more noticeable.
Gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer. There is no more for heaven now to give.
You hear that on the word give. My wife sings with a lot of vibrato, so there's going to be a lot more noticeable tuning happening on things like that. But of course, I want to back that retune speed down to 29. Now, when I'm singing, I'm a lot more pitchy than my wife is, so I have to lean more on having a heavier use of autotune. It's nice when you have a lead vocal where you don't really have to have it. Autotune's very much got a sound to it. It's almost like a tone shape, and we're all used to hearing it because, of course, it's all over the place. Then I've got this ProQ 3 Reverb, basic reverb. If you've got PreSonus Studio One, you can use their Pro EQ as well. Rolling off a lot of low end. I've got this low cut or high pass filter at 177 Hertz, and then I've got a cut of minus 4.3 decibels at 448 Hertz. Most of modern songs that you're listening to, for this song, I'm particularly referencing a lot of these like acoustic sessions you see on YouTube, stuff like Phil Wickham and Brandon Lake when they're on channels like Worship Together or Worship Essentials. You see this kind of in the round setup where they're all got acoustic guitars and pianos, very similar mix. I'm noticing that the lead vocals have a ton of low end cut out of them. We don't have these big booming vocals like we used to, so we're cutting out some of that. So here is with auto-tune, and I'm going to engage our low cut. So here it is with no EQ, and then I'll turn the EQ on.
What gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give.
And that's going to help because as we add more instruments, everyone's fighting for those low mids. The low end needs to be pretty set aside. So we have that. Next up is the Empirical Labs Distressor plugin. This is my compressor plugin I'm using on her lead vocal. As you can see, I've got a 2-to-1 ratio. You may see a lot of gain reduction, but specifically when we get to the chorus type sections, the louder she is, the more dynamic range we're going to be chopping down. So here's a louder portion of the song. I'll have the plugin bypassed, and then we'll listen to it with the plugin on.
Peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. Peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus.
Nice. So we're only getting like 2 or 3 decibels of gain reduction, which I'm completely happy with. I do want to be backing off some compression with these acoustic tracks. I'm a person who's prone to using a lot of compression, a lot of tuning, a lot of quantizing, trying to get a more natural sound. I got the attack set to 5, the release time set to about the same thing, between 5 and 6. Output and input are set up nicely. So the input, I'm basically driving the input. So in the louder portions, I am getting some gain reduction, but on lower portions of this song, quieter portions, you may not see any compression happening whatsoever.
He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom.
Because that right there, as I'm listening to the vocal in context of the mix, I'm listening for, can I understand the words that she is saying? If there are words getting dropped off because they're too quiet, I of course want them to be louder. If things are getting too loud and need to be quieter, that's when I'm gonna add more compression. Then we got another instance of EQ. I'm trying to knock down some of the sibilance because as we compress, we're getting a little bit more high end. I'm only taking out 1.5 decibels at 6K. Then I'm taking out some more 648 Hertz, about 3 decibels there, 291. Again, these mid-range frequencies, they're gonna be fought over with the guitars and stuff. So we're gonna engage that. Here's a little before and after.
To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus.
All right, so now we're gonna start dealing with a little bit of the S's, particularly on the word Jesus. We're getting a lot of S's there. So I've got this compressor plugin from FabFilter, It's a great plugin to use. They have a preset set up for de-essing, and then what I'm doing is I'm taking this red band and I'm increasing the amount of frequencies being affected by the de-esser. Let's listen to this before and after. Here's before.
To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus.
Really cleans up all that harshness we're getting from the high range there. And then the last plugin, this is a magic plugin called Soothe. It's from Oka Sound. It's a great plugin. Check it out if you can. It is third party, so we'll have to pay for it. We don't understand how it works. It's kind of like a multi-band processor. If you increase any of these bands, you're gonna get more affected area. It somehow keeps the level consistent, and it's still, like we were talking about with the de-essing, there's a smoothing factor. Seems like magic, but here's a little before and after.
To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus.
All right, and that is pretty much our lead vocal. If we add in some reverb, here's what it sounds like.
To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus.
And I'm not sure with this plugin here, you're gonna get much as far as pre-delay. Looks like the pre-delay is off. The decay is set to maximum. We don't have any filter engaged. There's no EQ happening. Mix is at 100%. Width is at 100% as well. So again, you listened to the reverb earlier in this video. Feel free to try to recreate that with the chamber. If you have the UAD stuff, particularly they have UAD native plugins. I don't think this is a natively available plugin, but if you've got a UAD Apollo interface or any of their DSP stuff, you should be able to run UAD Capital Chambers. Now, to quickly run through the rest of them, the harmony vocal has the exact same processing as the lead vocal. I believe the only differences would be when we're EQing, we might be cutting out more low end than the lead vocal. It looks pretty similar. All right, so here is our lead vocal and our harmony both together. I do have the harmony panned out to the right 20. So on PreSonus Studio One, I just want it a smidge to the right. I don't want it to be right on top of the lead vocal. And it's also being sent to the chamber reverb. So here's these two together.
To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. For my life is wholly bound to His.
If you've got two vocals or two instruments that are similarly mixed and you want one to stand out more than the other, just turn the other one down by 6 decibels. Increments of 3 is usually a good way to go. With 6, you're definitely going to notice a difference, okay? Now let's get to the acoustic guitars. We've got some low end being rolled off, and we've got this LA2A compressor happening. We'll find a section here. So this is Acoustic 1, which is a lot of finger picking. So settings were definitely different when it came to the gain settings. When I'm recording, I needed this to be turned up quite a bit because finger picking is not going to be as loud as me strumming chords. Here is the acoustic guitar. I'll just bypass these plugins completely. Here it is to start. Lots of low end. Okay, that low end needs to be dealt with because unless it's the only instrument in our track, it's going to be fighting and taking up space. So we're cutting out, we've got a low cut filter at 171 Hertz. We've got another low end cut that's 10 decibels cut at 474 Hertz. Let's take a listen to that with the EQ engaged. And then our LA2A compressor. I like these simple compressors, very similar to the 1176 in that you basically have an input and output knob. There's a few more settings available on 1176, but with the LA2A, it's a very gentle compressor, so we're not hearing it as much, but we need to take a look at how much gain reduction we're actually getting. Here it is bypassed, and then I'll engage it. Nothing. Okay, so that LA2A could probably be completely bypassed. I used the same thing on the Taylor Acoustic. If we add some reverb to the acoustic guitar track, here it is before. That also helps with the width situation. I did mono record this acoustic guitar, and with the reverb, we are hearing some stuff in the left ear. I've got that guitar panned to the right 50, about 50%. The same settings are gonna be consistent with the Taylor Acoustic, so let's solo that. We'll just listen to it before. I'll go to a section of the song where we got some more strumming happening. Getting more compression off of the Taylor because it is doing a lot more aggressive strumming. Here's the two acoustic guitars together, left and right. Got the Taylor on the left 50, the Martin on the right 50. We'll do a little bit in context the rest of the song in just a smidge, but again, the mandolin, same kind of features. Let's listen to it with no plugins whatsoever. Here's a before. And with the mandolin, it's got almost like a lead vocal. It's got some piercing frequencies up in the treble frequencies. So I'm using the same kind of tactic I would for a lead vocal. I've got this de-esser setting of the FabFilter EQ in place again, FabFilter compressor again, and then the Soothe plugin is taking out a lot of those harsh frequencies you get in the higher notes on the mandolin. Sounds pretty good, and we're sending it off to the reverb. Now, panning wise, I put the mandolin to the left 40. I don't have it turned down whatsoever in the fader because when I'm playing the mandolin, I'm trying to play the notes on the mandolin when the vocal is not singing. So if the vocal's singing, you're gonna hear a lot more reserved mandolin. When the vocal is done singing, I'll bring out those notes really loud. Here are the acoustic guitars and the mandolin together. So as you can hear, when we're mixing, when the plugins are engaged with the acoustic guitars, we're losing a lot of that low end and mid range that's just gonna be competitive later on in the mix, okay? And last but not least, we have this key pad multi-instrument deal going on. I do have down -12. That's not because the piano needs to be 12 decibels quieter than everything else. It's just that with virtual instruments are often set up to be right at 0 when you're recording. They make virtual instruments sound really loud when you load them so that you'd be very impressed with how loud they are, but we need to turn that down so it's more similar to as if we were recording a real piano. So I've got that at -12. I'm taking out a bunch of the low mids on the piano. This is territory that the vocal is probably gonna be fighting with the acoustic guitars. Every instrument pretty much has a mid-range quality to it. So when you stack up all of those mid-ranges, you're gonna end up getting some really muddy stuff if you don't address it early on. So an EQ and a compressor. Let me go ahead and bypass these plugins and the reverb. Here's what the piano keys track sounds like before. The compressor settings on this piano track, I've got a 4:1 ratio. I've got an attack time of 0.25 milliseconds, which is crazy fast, a release time of 200 milliseconds. You can see on this, the feedback from the FabFilter plugins are pretty great. You can see how much gain reduction is happening at the top here. Whenever that red line is moving, that is gain reduction in action. So pretty consistently, we're getting about 3 decibels of gain reduction on the piano. Now, everything is headed towards the mix bus, and this mix bus is very simple. It is just the level limiter plugin from FabFilter. This is their L2 limiter. It is set to the transparent preset, and I'm adding 18 decibels of volume. This is where we're getting our volume from. If I disengage this limiter plugin, we have all of our tracks being fed to it, nice and pretty. Here's what it sounds like before.
To this I hold, my sin has been defeated. Jesus now and ever is my plea. Oh, that for Jesus bled.
So as you can see, we're getting, most of the time, we're not getting any limiting except for those big hits. On the big hits, we get about 3 decibels of limiting from this limiter, but on the transparent setting, I don't want to be hearing the limiting. Now, if you're an audiophile and you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, wow, that is very limited. But for most people out there, when you start a song on your phone, if your song is not competitively loud, it might get skipped over. Now, there's a lot of things out there that you can go into with Spotify and iTunes where they will level adjust your song. But I will say this, they are more likely to turn down your track than to turn it up. If you submit something that's just too quiet, it's probably still gonna sound pretty quiet. So when you add a limiter, you don't need to always add 18 decibels like I'm doing here. It all depends on how loud you were recording your tracks to begin with. A lot of mixes out there, if I'm doing drums, I may only need to add 6 decibels, but when I'm looking at this plugin on the transparent setting, I don't want to see gain reduction constantly happening. But on the big sections, if I see 3 decibels or less, that should be pretty decent when it comes to limiting. I'm not overthinking all the true peak values and things like that. All right, so the only other thing I want to mention is just the level balancing of this track. If you record your vocals, your acoustic guitars, all of your instruments, and you're aiming for that -18 level, if you're being consistent with your gain structure, then all this fader stuff is going to make sense. My lead vocal is right at 0. I want the lead vocal to be the most prominent thing in this track. My harmony is at -6. My guitars are at -4. My mandolin is at 0, and that's highly because, like I mentioned earlier, my mandolin isn't fighting the vocal. My mandolin is playing back and forth. So I'm thinking of the lead vocal and the mandolin very similarly. And then the piano is at -12. So the instruments and stuff usually need to be quite quieter than the lead vocal, but it all comes down to what song you're doing, your arrangement, when people are playing. If somebody's playing the entire time and they're just slamming on their instrument, you're gonna have to treat that very different than you would the mandolin track, for instance. So that is the breakdown of the song, Yet Not I, But Through Christ in Me. Like I mentioned earlier, links in the description of this video if you want to download the raw audio tracks. You can mix this song for yourself, put up some PreSonus Studio One stock plugins, try to get a similar result. Those are under the Mix Reps #1. You can download those, links in the description. Thanks so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more video just like this, and I'll see you next time. Bye.